Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. I want to begin immediately by talking about what's been happening around the country and also in our fake news media. As you're probably aware, there have been protests going on for a while now, in some places for several months at this point. The most recent one has been actually some protesters near Churchill Downs in Kentucky. It's actually to protest not necessarily to protest the Kentucky Derby, but to bring attention to what they're trying to protest. And this is actually related to Breonna Taylor. She was an EMT who was shot home. I don't know too much about this specific incident because there have been just so many. But my understanding is the protesters are protesting for racial injustice. And in response, we have had a bunch of lunatics show up armed with military gear. They have semiotic weapons, face masks, all this stuff. I don't know what these people are thinking, but when a group of people are protesting racial injustice, do you really show up with semiotic weapons? I mean, think about the impression you're giving there. Clearly, you're in opposition to the racial groups, okay? So by showing up with these guns, you're basically saying, hey, I'm a racist. I'm an idiot. These lunatics are actually in different places, but in other cities, there have been people driving into protesters using their vehicles. There have been people using spray paint, absolutely ridiculous. And of course, the right is eating it up. They're defending the actions of these lunatics like that Kyle Rittenhouse, that 17-year-old. Where were his parents at? How did they let him cross state lines? What happened to, family first and all that stuff from the Republicans? This is their traditional ideals, right? And of course, you have the pathetic left as always just cowering down and not saying a word, and yet at the same time, oh, this is why we need to ban guns. Okay, well, how does that help you when you're being ran over by vehicles? How does it help you when people are driving down the street pepper spraying you and shooting paintball guns at you? I mean, a frozen paintball can kill someone, so you can ban guns, but that doesn't change the fact that these lunatics are out there hurting people. You are showing up armed and obviously violent. In the I forget where it was, but those same lunatics who showed up with military gear, they showed up at a park. They cleared everyone out, of course, through implied threat. I mean, what are you gonna do? A bunch of guys show up with automatic guns. Hey, we're gonna need you to clear this area. What are you gonna do? Tell them no? And then what? Get shot just like in these other places? I mean, this is insane. So they clear out these parks and then they start marching on downtown, and they're fighting with protesters and different things. They're smashing windows and stuff. It's insane. And of course, again, the right's just eating it up. Trump is throwing this out here. Oh, look at these cities and how crazy they are. Like, these people who are smashing the windows and they've got the guns and fighting people and shooting people, they have Trump supporter, they have the MAGA hats, they have the Vote Trump 2020. Obviously, this is just stoked violence. From the right, they're just propping this up. From the left, they're just pansing it out and just trying to, the left is almost like trying to meet them without arms. And I'm not saying, the protesters should show up armed. Of course, we don't need the second Civil War with everything else going on. But man, this whole situation is getting a little out of control. And the longer we let this go, the worse things are going to get. These armed people need to be dealt with by the police. This is exactly why the left says, oh, defund the police. Okay, then what happens when there's no police? Who are you gonna call when a bunch of guys show up with semi-automatic rifles and say, hey, time to clear out? What are you gonna do? Huh? No Second Amendment for you, right? So there's just a lot here, and it's just being propagated by the fake news media. It's a left versus right narrative. No one realizes that half of the right is actually left, half of the left is actually right. People are in the middle and aren't. I personally don't think that left and right divide is accurate. Even the 4-quadrant thing of, communist, socialist, capitalist, and dictator, or whatever it is, I think even a 4-chart panel is just not enough to describe human nature. There's just too many things at stake, and so many people are willing to go along just because, hey, I vote Democrat before, and I'm going to keep voting Democrat. I don't care. And then others are going to say, hey, this guy, this Trump guy, he made my business next, $100 million this past 4 years. I think I'm going to go for that. So it's not even ideology. It's just a matter of, hey, we need to stop shooting people and running them over. I mean, these racial protests would not be happening if, these unwarranted shootings, go when you SWAT a person's home and you have the wrong home or you have the wrong person and then you end up shooting them. Like, how do you expect that to look? Like as an officer in that situation, you have to go in knowing, hey, if I do this wrong, and it's just insane. I've seen so many police officers be able to stand down a violent person or be able to, get through a situation without needing to shoot. I have seen situations where a police officer was in every right, had the reason to shoot. That's fine. Anyone who's threatening another person, I mean, you have to understand. It's like walking into a store to rob it, okay? If you walk into that store to rob it and you have a gun, do not be surprised in the least if some other person with a gun shoots you down. You should expect it, and you should know that. So it's sad that we even have to tell people that. But of course, poverty begets violence and aggression. You never see a person making $100,000 a year robbing a store. You don't see those people holding up people. Right? You only see it in the poor places, so of course Republicans try to say, oh, it's the poor people. Well, who caused the poor people? I mean, you keep cutting these benefits and all that, but anyways, that's completely on a whole other subject. These protests, we just have to realize that if no one was getting killed, then I don't think any of this would be happening. So the sooner we get down to that part, let's ignore the politics, let's ignore who says what. Let's get down to just what is, not what could be. Now, I keep seeing people talk about how COVID is it's just not this thing. It's not important. It's a fake disease. It's a pandemic. Yada, yada, yada.
Don't have corona. I have a
All people have corona.
Nobody has corona.
This is not your country. This is not your country.
I don't give a
Don't abuse us, okay?
No, quick. Come on, quick. 500. I give you 100. 500. I'm not giving you 500.
200 rupees, 200.
I'm not giving you 200. It's 100. I'm not giving you 200.
All the people not wearing masks.
Exactly. Nobody.
भाई ओए बात करने की तमीज नहीं है बात करने की तमीज नहीं है
I have to get through.
Follow the rules, nobody stop you.
Where does it make sense?
Buy into the narrative that, it only affects people with underlying health conditions. Remember this. Over 70% of people above age 55 have an underlying health condition, whether they know it or not. 70%. There are over 80 million people in the U.S. alone who are over 55. So let's just cut it at 80 million exactly. If 70% of people over age 55 have an underlying health condition, you're talking about 56 million Americans alone. 56. That's 1 in 7 Americans, okay? When you say that the COVID is not a big deal, it only affects people's underlying health conditions, imagine the impact if you just lost 1/7 of the people in this country. Those are people who are no longer buying stuff, working, paying taxes, or whatever it is. I understand this is the older group, but that doesn't matter. I myself have worked with people who are under 70s. So the fact of the matter is you are losing people who are not only earning money, but there's so much else going on there. I mean, and of course the dealing with the implications of the death of a family member. When it comes to these deaths, people have to realize that's just looking at the older crowd. We're not even talking about younger people who have, health conditions, whether they know it or not. A lot of people, they refuse to go to a doctor or they just don't have the money. In this country, it's so expensive that many people just go 10, 15 years without going to a doctor. You hear people complain about, it takes 6 months to see a doctor in the UK or Canada. First off, that's not true. But second, if that were the case, That's better than 15 years. What kind of system do you have when people only go to a doctor when they're a kid, and as soon as they're an adult, they're like, oh, I can't afford this. I'm going to skip on the doctor for about 20 years. Once I have kids, maybe I'll go back into it, but it's just so expensive I can't afford it. This is truly insane. And of course, another thing to consider is the official death count with COVID. It's hovering around 200,000. Keep in mind, excess deaths, for those who are not in the know, excess deaths is essentially looking at, okay, over the past 10, 20, 30 years, in August, how many deaths have we had? How many deaths in July have we had? And despite what the fake news and the talking heads say on both sides, the crime rate has actually been going down for decades. It really has. And so when you look at deaths for the past, 5-10 years, we are over in excess deaths by over 250,000. That means potentially we could be looking at an extra 250,000 people dead from COVID on top of what we have at a minimum. Now, of course, our testing is so pathetically poor and slow that we'll never truly get a good understanding. And of course, you hear people discuss, oh, we've got the best testing. No, we don't. We can test, 800,000 people a day? Okay, there are how many people in the U.S.? 380 plus million people? Okay, well, after 10 days of 800,000 people testing a day, that's 8 million people. After 100 days, that is 80 million people. That means in almost, actually over 3 months, you have not even tested a full 1/3 of the population. So at that point, you're talking, how much explosive growth can that virus have? The entire time it's infecting people, whether we can test them or not. You hear this thing Trump keeps saying, oh, we need to do less testing. Okay, if we do less testing, that doesn't make the virus go away. It's just like deaths, right? Just because you don't count it as a COVID death doesn't mean it may not be a COVID death. Now, of course, on the opposite end, doesn't necessarily mean it is a COVID death. But when you look at the fact that so many people are stuck at home, so few people are driving, so many people have lost their work, so they can't go work. They're just sitting at home. Okay, but you have all these death overages. Okay, well, if people aren't doing things where they would normally go die, how is it that our deaths are so high? As a matter of fact, a lot of people claimed, oh, the hospitals did not get overwhelmed, so therefore the COVID wasn't an issue. Well, yes, hospitals didn't get overwhelmed because people weren't out getting into accidents. Car accidents are one of the biggest killers of the every single year in the U.S., and when it comes to so many other robberies and violent crimes and all that, it's kind of hard to rob a house when everyone is home, right? So a lot of this violence and quote-unquote murder that's been happening lately, and of course it is murder, but a lot of this violence that's been happening lately is related to these protests and people showing up in military gear and people assaulting others from cars. They're standing in the backs of trucks shooting at people. They're throwing stuff. They're spraying chemicals. You don't know what they're spraying. For all you know, they could be spraying acid in your eyes. You might think it's just pepper spray and it's just burning your eyes badly. Or it could be acid. It could be melting your face. How are you supposed to know? That's why I keep saying, if you're going to assault someone, don't be surprised what happens. If you lean out a window and start shooting paintballs or whatever or spray stuff, don't be surprised if someone puts a gun back in your face and you eat that bullet. You only have a limited time before this whole situation starts to blow out of control. And this whole thing of blaming COVID as a distraction on the left, are you kidding me? The left can't coordinate a luncheon. How are they going to coordinate this massive effort across the globe? Uganda and India do not care about Trump's reelection, okay? So to say that this COVID thing is all to target Trump, really? You really think the Ugandans care what we think about that as far as Trump and his campaign? You think that November 4th or 5th or 10th or whatever, that Ugandans are going to say, oh, we're done. There's no more COVID because the Democrats won. Really? Think logically about that here, people. Don't let this false news media narrative fool you because it's getting really, really out of hand. And speaking of which, the economy itself is just absolutely destroyed, just completely devastated. I would say decimation, but they say that's a 1 in 10. It seems like it's a lot higher than that. So, as far as the economy goes, About 100,000 businesses were closed forever back in May. 100,000 businesses. That's not 100,000 people. Think about that. A small business is someone that can employ one person or can employ multiple people. It might employ 20 or 30 people and still be considered a small business. So you have the potential of anywhere from 100,000 jobs up to in excess of millions of jobs that were just gone forever. These are businesses that just simply could not compete with these giant corporations that get these bailouts. Restaurants were even worse than these private retail businesses because, well, you can't open. So many of these places rely on alcohol and dine-in, serving, things like that. You can't do anymore. And the few places that can, it's just you're like half capacity. You're at a quarter capacity. You just can't survive like that as a business, especially with restaurants and retail stores, which already operate on such thin margins. There's no money to be had. Actually, the University of Illinois, Harvard Business School, the Harvard University, and University of Chicago, they're the ones who came out and said, hey, listen, these businesses, they're gone. They're not coming back. And I'm sure people have seen it across Facebook, across in the real world. You show up at a business and it's closed forever. You never heard that it was closing. You never saw any notice, just done. That's because they can't survive. But, when Congress is giving trillions of dollars to these giant corporations, it's like, well, we could have kept it going. Why did we need to give $2 trillion to the people and $4 trillion to some giant businesses that ended up firing everyone anyways? Why didn't you just give that whole $6 trillion to every person? Every person gets money. You have to now go spend it. Tell them, hey, you have to go spend it in the next 60 days. Can you imagine how much money you would have if we took $60 trillion and divided it over, like, let's just say the adults of the U.S. population? Any working age adult can get this money divided to them. If they have to then go spend it, where are they going to spend it? They're going to go out to eat. They're going to pay for things. They're going to buy things. They're going to book vacations for next year or whatever. They're going to start putting this money back into the economy. People are going to have a job because they're going to have to make these products. They're going to have to serve food. And even if it's has to be a change in the way things are done, instead of, a dine-in business, maybe Applebee's has to convert, some of its restaurants to just straight carry-out delivery. But these things can be done. The larger businesses have the better capacity with that. So really giving them money like Applebee's and American Airlines, that makes no sense. We should have gave it to the people who could then choose, okay, you know what, American Airlines, you suck. I'm going to go over to Delta and spend this money the government gave me on Delta. We're supposed to, if we're a free market capital, if we are a free capitalist society, the consumer should choose the winners, not the government. If the government's going to choose the winners, then the government is socialist government. If the government's going to choose winners, they need to choose someone who's going to win for the country, not just, their friends. I personally don't care one way or the other which way we go, as long as the people in charge, of course, they don't screw us over. You can be a capitalist. A purely capitalist society could work if not for the fact that the richest, longest, most operating companies will have the most power because they can just pay people. I mean, look at Coca-Cola. They can afford to pay assassins to go attack the protesters in Venezuela. Hey, look at that. More protesters being attacked. Imagine that. They can afford to do that, okay? Can the mom and pop businesses afford to do things like that? No. So in a purely capitalist society, you have to realize that the most powerful people can do whatever they want. No holds bar. And in a purely socialist society, things are usually more clear. It's just the power structure can be manipulated. In this case, it's all about the people who happen to sit at the tops of these groups. If the wrong people sit at the wrong groups at the wrong times, together, their coalition could seriously harm the U.S. or just whatever government structure is there. So a purely socialist government would probably have a better job simply running a day-to-day government, whereas a capitalist, society, of course, would be very minimal government, basically have no tooth on these big businesses. And frankly, if the government ever tried to oppose it, it could just the business can just fight it. Even today, we don't have a purely capitalist society, but these giant businesses still fight. When Microsoft was when it was being anti-competitive with Netscape, it spent 3 years pushing off the lawsuit. So by the time the lawsuit finally came through, Microsoft lost, but Microsoft lost the lawsuit. In reality, Microsoft actually won because Netscape ended up folding and Microsoft became the #1 monopoly because of Internet Explorer. That's why even today you still have Internet Explorer included on every Windows computer, because it's an absolute garbage program, but it comes with Windows. And anymore, it looks like it opens up a lot of low-level access to your computer, but that's its own thing. The point is, we need to take the power back from these giant entities. Doesn't matter if it's government, doesn't matter if it's corporation, trade groups, no matter what. It needs to be on an individual. It needs to be on you. And you don't realize that you are paying for this government's mistake. That $6 trillion that got loaned out, of which only $2 trillion went to you, you have to pay back all $6 trillion. Not just the $2 trillion that was given to you. And yes, that $1,200 stimulus, you have to pay it back. It's going to be paid back in taxes. I hope you're ready. Next year's tax season is going to be bad, and I can almost guarantee that the following years are not going to be pretty. So we've got to really consider things, because this is not good. This administration has not been good. Left-leaning or right-leaning doesn't really matter. They've completely screwed over farmers. They've screwed over manufacturers. Despite what they say in the news, what they say on the White House press conferences, it doesn't matter what they say. It just matters what they do. If they sign a law that increases tariffs on imports, that means Americans have to pay more to import that product, which means Americans are probably not going to either use that product or they're going to have to pay more. So we are now paying more money to the government to use stuff from outside the country. But where are you going to get it from? We sent all the manufacturing jobs away. And we sent all these production jobs. So many tech jobs are being sent away. The only thing we can really do at this point is we just need to start collectively. You need to start buying small. No more of this giant. Do not support Walmart. Do not support Amazon. Seriously, these companies have enough money. You need to start supporting the locals around you, or else your town is going to start to look like a ghost town. That one little street you have that happens to have all your stores, even that's susceptible, despite the fact that there's not much around. Everyone needs to just do this collectively. You need to start encouraging your friends, family, anyone you can. Talk about it whenever you can. Look, buy small, don't buy big. And the most important thing of all, I would say, make sure you vote November 3rd. The election's coming up. I believe vote.gov is going to have resources for anyone in the U.S. Otherwise, of course, just do an internet search. You know how to find this stuff. Seriously, this fake news media does not want you to vote. This administration doesn't want you to vote. I see so many people on the left and the right who are just doing things that are just absolutely disingenuous and completely just disenfranchising people. It's ridiculous. It should be a complete violation of our rights as the Constitution, and just everything just is a mess right now. There's only one thing we can do, and it's fix it. I hope to see you all again soon. Take care.
No justice! No Derby! 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 No justice! No Derby!